New tonight, we are taking a look at transparency when it comes to law enforcement records. In our special report, Reconsidering Confidentiality, several of you have asked why complaints against police and their disciplinary records are not made public. KTVA 11's Daniela Rivera joins us with the answer and whether that could change. Daniela.
Well, Joe, the short answer is Alaska law protects those records as confidential, and that was reinforced with a decision from Alaska's Supreme Court earlier this year. So tonight, we're asking the people who have the power to change our laws to weigh in. Here's what some of them had to say. As Alaskans demand transparency and accountability from law enforcement, Alaska remains one of 23 states that keep law enforcement disciplinary records secret. It's an issue that came up during a recent virtual town hall in Anchorage.
When an officer does have misconduct on their record, how is that possible that we could be able to see that as a public?
With multiple community members asking why they can't see complaints against officers and disciplinary records.
I was wondering if you could speak to why you haven't made them public to date and whether you would be willing to do so in the future.
And it's not a choice by the police department, it's something we're required to do by law. So that's not something we have the ability to control.
In April, Alaska's Supreme Court ruled that those records are protected under the same law that keeps the personnel files of government employees confidential. But lawmakers believe that statute could be up for discussion during the next legislative session.
Well, I believe you'll see bills introduced for sure related to that and other matters relating to policing. I'm certain of that.
Senate Minority Leader Tom Begich said he supports a change that would still protect officers from false and unfounded accusations.
It's good government to allow the public to know, especially when there's doubt, but to allow the public to know when law enforcement have stepped over the bounds and been disciplined by their own authorities for that. That people should know that.
In the House, Anchorage Democrat Representative Andy Josephson points to a different Alaska Supreme Court ruling from 1990.
The Supreme Court made these sort of broad pronouncements about how a democracy should work, and that the public, because we're in a democracy, is entitled to have a certain level of scrutiny, a certain level of transparency, and access to key information so that they can be decision makers. And I think if we operate off of those sort of approaches, that we could modify the statutes accordingly. But we want to make sure that we do it in a reasonable way.
He says he anticipates a robust conversation once legislators head back to Juneau, and members of law enforcement and the communities they serve should expect reform. We also reached out to the Senate majority and House Republicans for comment. North Pole Republican Senator Coghill, who chairs the Judiciary Committee, sent a statement saying, in part, transparency, accountability, and trust between Alaska's law enforcement and the public is a high priority, and we should approach the issue with the utmost care as we weigh these important issues. I will be listening for feedback from members of my community and from the wider Alaska public. When we come back.
We just want a seat at the table, right? We just want to be included in the process and to have a chance to explain sort of the things that we're concerned about.
We hear from the president of Anchorage's police union for a law enforcement perspective on reconsidering confidentiality. And we'll tell you how often their contract with the city allows for disciplinary records to be purged. Welcome back to our report, Reconsidering Confidentiality. In Anchorage, not only are police disciplinary records confidential, but they're purged from officers' personnel files, sometimes in as little time as 1 to 2 years. Today we spoke with the president of the Anchorage Police Department Employees Association, or APDEA, about their contract with the city and his stance on a move toward more transparency.
No justice! No peace!
Alaska's largest police department has been on the receiving end of both criticism
They act as if I don't exist.
and support in recent weeks, with attention now turned toward APD's policies and procedures and an ongoing discussion about trust and transparency. We met up with Sergeant Jeremy Conkling, the president of APDEA, the union representing officers, for his take on reconsidering confidentiality of complaints and disciplinary records.
When it comes to instances of officers who have sustained policy violations for serious misconduct, we at the APDEA, we support that. Having that type of information available to the public, I think, is worthwhile and beneficial. and builds the public trust.
However, there's a balance, he says, when it comes to improving public trust and protecting officers' rights to privacy. He believes low-level policy violations such as running a stop sign shouldn't be made public.
When we identify that and the officer is reminded of that and then they have a chance to correct their behavior and then they do correct their behavior, I just don't think that there's any value to releasing that to the public and so to speak, crucifying the officer for something for an unlimited amount of time in a searchable public database. I think that probably goes too far into their personal privacy rights.
According to APDEA's contract with the municipality of Anchorage, oral and written reprimands can be removed from an officer's file within a year if there isn't a similar violation during that time. Suspension, demotion, and disciplinary transfer records can be purged within 2 years. Conklin calls it progressive discipline.
It's the same rationale that I was using when I was describing not having stuff held over your head, right? Because if you get that stop sign issue and then I don't run any stop signs for a year or 2 years or whatever it is, and then maybe I run another one, we're not going to go back and use that previous one from a year or two ago for this low-level minor policy violations.
When it comes to the more serious violations, he says this practice could be revisited.
Our contract is negotiated with the municipality every 3 years, and if that is something that is important to APD Command or to the municipality, I'm happy to negotiate a timeline that they feel is more reasonable.
Conklin clarified that all records, even once removed from an officer's employee file, are still kept in APD's internal affairs system.
There's no resistance. I mean, again, I think that the conversation needs to occur, and I think whatever changes we end up going forward with, they need to be carefully thought out and they need to be reasonable.
Systematic oppression has gone this far. We are tired.
As Alaskans demand change, Conklin says the union welcomes a conversation about reform. They just want a seat at the table. We reached out to the mayor's office to ask whether the current purging policy will be reconsidered when the union's contract expires at the end of the year. A spokesperson told us tonight that they are working on getting us an answer to that question. Joe.